Currently, you have a very functional Laravel project. This is basically a regular Laravel project with the regular user interface. You have very consistent views because you are using the layout in all of them. You know about the assets, how Laravel Mix works for this. And now we are going to start preparing our regular Laravel application to be a real-time Laravel application. So for that, the first step is to configure a real-time service on Laravel. And probably one of the best services for that is Pusher. So for that, you just need to go to pusher.com. And in case that you don't have an account, so you can go to sign up and specify, of course, your credentials there. Once you are already registered, you can log in eventually and go to the dashboard of Pusher. Once you are there in your dashboard, for the first time, usually you are going to get this assistant. In the case that it is not your first application or for some reason you don't get the view of that assistant, so you can just go to click on create new app, and well, you are going to have the new assistant to specify the details about your application. So let's create one application. We are going to call this real-time Laravel. And you can specify a cluster. I recommend to select a cluster which is close to your location to not have so much delay on the responses or basically the real-time connections. And then you can optionally create multiple applications for the environment. I can recommend this because you're going to have different credentials for the development, the staging, and the production. Of course, if you are just testing, you don't need to do that, but I strongly recommend that in case that you are going to have at least development and production, especially to have separated credentials for that. Additionally, you can select the technologies that you are going to use, but we don't need to do that because, well, this is what we are going to do during this class and the next one to configure our Laravel application. So let's go directly to create my apps. And once it is there, you just need to go to the app keys, and there, of course, you are going to have the app ID, the key, the secret, and the cluster that you selected. The app ID is, of course, to identify the application. The key is to identify, let's say, a password, but in the public context, that means in the front end. And the secret, of course, is like the password, but for be used in the backend. So in this case, we are working in the backend. We are going to configure Laravel to use Pusher as we already have our credentials. So how can we do that? Well, Laravel has a configuration for that. If we go to config, broadcasting, you can see that we can use several drivers. And in this case, we have Pusher, which is probably the best option in this case. So we have the driver, we have the key, we have the secret, the app ID, and we have the cluster. The other options, you don't need to modify that. And every one of them is coming from the environment file. So if we go to the .env file that we have in our project, just here, you can go and check there the Pusher app ID, the key, the secret, exactly as it is coming from the configuration. So there, you need to specify this. In that way, those values are going to be perfectly secured because the environment file is not going or should not be shared in any public, let's say, repository or versioning control system. So let's go to take our values. We have the ID. Let's to put it there. Then we have the key. And finally, we have the secret. Of course, you need to specify the cluster to match that. In this case, it is US2, but it depends on the configuration that you selected when creating the application. So at this point, Laravel knows the credentials that needs to use to, let's say, interact with Pusher and the request to Pusher to broadcast the events. Of course, we are going to talk about that later, but remember the architecture that we had in a previous class where Laravel sends the message to the broadcasting service and the broadcasting service broadcast the messages. And for that, Laravel needs to authenticate using the key, the secret, and the app ID. For this, we finally need to say to Laravel to use Pusher as the broadcasting service. So if you check the broadcast driver is currently locked, we just need to change that to Pusher. And at this point, Laravel knows everything that is required to interact with Pusher. But we have a missing dependency because Laravel needs the files, the classes, and the components provided by Pusher to interact with it. Let's say the Pusher server. So for that, we need to open our command prompt and using Composer one more time, require a new dependency which is called Pusher/Pusher PHP server. This is going to install, let's say, the dependencies that are going to allow to Laravel to communicate easily with Pusher and with the Pusher server. This is going to allow you and of course to Laravel to interact from your backend with Pusher directly. Once it is installed, everything should be working in our backend except that we need to say to Laravel to enable the broadcasting event. So if we go to App Providers, we have a broadcast service provider that is going to register the routes for the broadcast, which are on routes channels. And in that route, if we go there, you can check that we are registering, and we are going to use that and talk about that later, the logic to authenticate or allow access to any specific channel. Don't worry about that. We are going to talk about channels. We are going to understand that. We are going to talk about the authorization, but we need to enable this provider to get access to these routes and that authentication flow. So for that, we need to go to the config app.php file, and in the providers list, you can check that we have commented the broadcast service provider. So just uncomment that line and you will have this registered, and that means that you will have your channels routes completely registered, and we are going to be allowed to use that in the following classes. So great, congratulations. At this point, your backend, that means Laravel, is perfectly capable to interact with Pusher because you configured your application, you specified your credentials, so Laravel can authenticate through the Pusher server using this dependency and using those credentials, and that is going to work pretty nice from your backend. But it is time to go to the front end because we need additionally the Mix Pusher app key and the Mix Pusher app cluster to be available, and in fact to talk about Laravel Echo because it's going to be a very important tool for the real-time applications with Laravel. So let's see that in the following class. So you have perfectly configured Laravel to use Pusher in the backend. That means we have the Pusher dependency using Composer, of course. We configure the credentials, the secret, we enable the provider for the broadcasting, but remember the real-time notifications needs to work in the backend to send the notifications, let's say, to the real-time service, but then the elements, the clients that are connected to the web service, the real-time service that is sending that messages, need to know how to do that, need to know what to do once you receive the message, and that is usually done using JavaScript, for example, when we are in the browsers. And for that, we need to establish connections with the WebSocket that Pusher or the service that you have for the real-time is exposing. So that means that we need to play a little with our dependencies for the frontend. As we did for our backend using Composer, we need to add the dependencies for Pusher and especially for Laravel Echo. Yes, we are going to introduce Laravel Echo now. Laravel Echo is the library in the frontend that is going to interact with Pusher to send and basically receive elements from the real-time messages, from the real-time events. So Laravel Echo is the bridge, the communication point between your backend and your frontend using that WebSockets and using Pusher, of course. So let's just start adding our dependencies before to enable the Laravel Echo components. Remember, Laravel Echo components are located in resources.js, bootstrap.js, and there you have commented for now the components for this. So let's to add the dependencies, and for that, once again, we need to open the command prompt in the location of our project. And there, using npm, we are going to require that components. So let's use npm install and we are going to require that as a development dependency using --save-dev, and we need two of them. Remember, the pusher library for JavaScript and the Laravel echo library. So let's just start with Laravel echo and then with pusher-js. Let's to press enter, and then of course npm is going to install that. Once again, we need to compile that, but before to compile, we need to enable Laravel echo. And how can we enable that? Well, we just need to uncomment those lines. You can see that here we are importing echo from the definition of Laravel echo, but additionally we are using pusher from the pusher.js. Both of them are the required dependencies that we just installed. So everything is good here. Then we have the definition of Laravel echo to say, hey, I'm going to use pusher, and I'm going to use this key, and I'm going to use this cluster. And for security, and because pusher allows that, we are going to encrypt the connections. So let's stop a little here, because you can see that we are using something called mix pusher app key and mix pusher app cluster, and there is a very interesting symmetry between these elements and the elements that we have in the .m file. Yes, those are basically the same. You have mix pusher app key and mix pusher app cluster in your environment file. So you might be wondering how it is possible, how a variable that we have in our environment file in the backend is perfectly available in the frontend. Well, that is some magic, let's say, from Laravel Mix. That is a very important element, a very important tool. You can see that we can access through the process element and in the environment part. Then we have this and this. And the interesting part is that you are not repeating the values. You are just referencing that from the original one. So the mix pusher app key is exactly equals to the pusher app key, and the same for the pusher app cluster. Those are references. In fact, everything that starts with mix underscore is going to be automatically available in the process.env component. So you can take advantage of that if you need. And that means that at this point you have available in your JavaScript your public key for pusher and your cluster, because those are required and very important to establish the connection with the WebSocket on pusher from the JavaScript. It means from the frontend. So once it is uncommented and we have our libraries, we need to go once again to the command prompt, remember in the location of the project, and run npm run dap to compile our new assets with the changes. So yes, at this point you have perfectly functional your Laravel application with pusher and your Laravel Mix using Laravel echo to interact with pusher as well from the frontend. So your backend and your frontend are perfectly capable at this point to interact with pusher and to establish WebSockets connection, which are very required to receive messages on real time. So yes, we are going to do that in the following sections and in the following classes, using this to start creating our first real-time application, and of course the other applications that we are going to learn and of course understand during this course. So see you there, because we are going to start with the most important part right now.